My name is Cassandra Vale, and I am 27 years old. The night I realized I was married to money but captured by the heart of a homeless man, I was standing in a gown worth more than everything he owned in this world. Diamonds glowed around my neck. The city lights shimmered under my penthouse balcony. And yet all I could think about was the man I had left shivering under a bridge, holding a paper cup and my last piece of honesty inside his calloused hands. I remember the taste of champagne on my tongue as I stared down at the street from the towering glass windows. Cars moved like silver veins through the darkness, and somewhere down there, among the shadows and forgotten corners, he existed. Noah. That was his name. A man who had nothing and somehow held everything that should have been mine. Sincerity, freedom, and a kind of love that didn't need gold to shine. Beside me, my husband's hand rested on my waist, heavy and polished, like the rings he wore. His name is Adrian Vale, and he is the kind of man the world kneels for. The kind of man people marry to escape poverty. The kind of man you choose when you're too afraid to follow your own heart. I wasn't always this woman in silk and silence. A year earlier, my life smelled like stale coffee and secondhand books, and my biggest luxury was buying fresh flowers from the old lady at the corner on Fridays. Back then, my mother's breathing was already labored, the hospital bills were already piling up, and every phone call felt like a countdown. I worked double shifts at a small hotel, changing sheets, cleaning bathrooms, smiling until my cheeks hurt. And in the quiet hours of the night, when the corridors were empty, I would go outside to take a breath of cold air and watch the forgotten people on the sidewalks, trying not to become one of them. That was when I first saw him. He was sitting by the alley next to the hotel, hood pulled up, backpack against his chest like it held his entire world. Rain had soaked his clothes, turning his dark hair into messy strands that clung to his forehead. People passed him without looking, stepping around him as if he were just another stain on the concrete. But when I looked at him, really looked, something inside me trembled. His eyes were not empty the way I expected. They were tired, yes, but sharp, aware, almost gentle, as if he was more concerned about how others felt when they saw him than about himself. I remember hesitating, my fingers tightening around the half-eaten sandwich I was supposed to finish on my break. My supervisor had warned me not to get too involved with the people around the hotel. Our guests pay to feel safe, she had said, not guilty. But something about the way he was hunched over, protecting that small backpack from the rain more than his own body, pulled me forward. I walked toward him, heart pounding as if I were about to do something dangerous, even though all I held was bread and a few pieces of ham. "Hey," I said softly, and my voice came out smaller than I expected. His eyes lifted, and the world around us shrank. The traffic noise became distant. The hotel doors behind me didn't exist for a moment. It was just me, a scared 26-year-old hotel maid with a sick mother, and him, a stranger on the sidewalk whose eyes were strangely calm, like a storm that had already passed. I offered him the sandwich. "It's fresh. I couldn't finish it." He looked at the food, then at me, as if he were evaluating something much bigger than a simple act of kindness. Then he smiled. And it wasn't the broken, desperate smile I had seen so many times on faces begging at the red lights. It was soft, grateful, and respectful, as if he understood exactly how hard it was for me to cross that invisible line between staff and street. "Only if you'll share it with me," he answered. His voice was deep and a little rough, like it hadn't been used for long conversations in a while. I don't like eating alone. That night, I sat on the curb in my cheap uniform, my name tag tilted, the scent of cleaning products still clinging to my skin, and shared a sandwich with a man who had no address. The ground was cold, the city was loud, but I felt strangely safe. We didn't talk about big things at first. We talked about the weather, the hotel, the lady with the flowers down the street. He told me his name was Noah, and when I asked where he was from, he just looked at the traffic and said, "Someplace I can't go back to yet." There was sadness in his words, but also something else. A quiet determination, like he still believed he would find a way to stand up again one day. After that, every night shift became a silent promise. I would rush through my tasks, stealing seconds whenever I could, just to step outside and see if he was there. Sometimes he wasn't, and my chest would tighten in disappointment. Sometimes I would find him reading a crumpled book under the weak streetlight, lips moving silently as if tasting the words. Sometimes he would be sketching people who passed by, his fingers stained with pencil graphite, capturing faces that would never know they had been seen. It was as if he refused to let the world turn him invisible. "Why do you draw them?" I asked once, leaning closer to see the notebook balanced on his knee. The portrait on the page was of a businessman who had just left the hotel, his suit perfect, his expression arrogant. Yet in Noah's sketch, he looked softer, almost human. "Because someone should remember them as they really are," Noah answered, glancing up at me with that half-smile of his. "And because it reminds me that I can still create something, even if it's just this." He closed the notebook gently, as if it was something precious, and I realized that he had more dignity in his worn clothes than some of the men who tipped me with crumpled bills and wandering hands. The more nights we talked, the more dangerous it became. Not because Noah scared me, but because he made me feel things I didn't have time for. Laughter in the middle of exhaustion, curiosity in the middle of fear, hope in the middle of hopelessness. My mother's health was failing, and every test result was worse than the last. The doctors spoke in numbers and probabilities, and all I could hear was the echo of money we didn't have. Insurance refused to cover half of what she needed. The medicine that could ease her pain cost more than my monthly salary. Every time I counted the bills in my pocket, my chest burned with shame. One evening, after a particularly brutal call from the hospital, I walked outside with my vision blurred by unshed tears. My hands were shaking so badly I almost dropped the tray I was carrying. Noah noticed immediately. He always noticed. "Cassandra," he called gently. Just the way he said my name made my knees feel weak, like he was anchoring me to something more solid than my own despair. I tried to smile, tried to pretend, but my lips trembled. "Rough day?" he asked, scooting over on the curb as if inviting me to sit in the only safe spot left in the universe. I sat beside him, clutching my hands together, my uniform scratching against my skin. For a moment, I couldn't speak. The fear was lodged in my throat like a stone. Finally, the words spilled out, broken and raw. "They said we're running out of time. They said if she doesn't start the new treatment soon, we might lose her." My voice cracked, and I hated how small I sounded. "I don't know how to do this anymore, Noah. I work, and it's never enough." He didn't interrupt. He didn't offer empty cliches about everything being okay. He simply listened, eyes focused, jaw tight, as if he wanted to absorb some of my pain through the air between us. Then he reached into his backpack and pulled out a small, folded blanket. Without a word, he draped it over my shoulders, even though he was the one sleeping on the ground at night. "You're allowed to be tired," he murmured. "You're allowed to be scared." His fingers brushed my arm lightly, and that single touch felt more intimate than all the expensive gifts I would later receive. "But you're not allowed to forget who you are, Cassie. You're the kind of woman who brings food to a stranger on a cold night. The world can take a lot from you, but it doesn't get to take that." I didn't know it then, but that night was a line in the sand. On one side, there was the girl who believed she only needed to work harder to fix everything. On the other, there was the woman who would eventually stand in a wedding dress, married to a man whose bank account could buy health, security, and anything else she thought she needed. Except the quiet warmth she had found sitting on that curb with a homeless artist who had nothing and still offered her everything he could. The possibility of marrying a rich man wasn't even in my mind yet. All I had in front of me were overdue bills and a mother whose smile was fading. But life has a cruel way of presenting choices that look like salvation when you're drowning. One of those nights, after cleaning up a particularly extravagant event at the hotel ballroom, I watched the guests leave in glitter and perfume. Laughter echoed off the chandeliers while I stacked plates and collected half-full glasses of wine. That was when I first saw Adrian Vale. He wasn't just another guest. He was the center of the room. He stood near the bar, suit tailored perfectly to his broad shoulders, his watch glinting each time he lifted his glass. People hovered around him like moths, craving his attention. I recognized his face from magazines and business articles left in the lobby: billionaire investor, real estate magnate. Real? The kind of man who could buy buildings with the same ease I bought bread. He shouldn't have even noticed me. But as I passed by carrying a tray of dishes, his eyes followed me. There was something cold and curious in his gaze, like someone evaluating a painting they might want to purchase. I tried to ignore it. I tried to keep moving. But as I turned to return to the kitchen, I heard his voice behind me. "Excuse me," he said, calm and smooth, and I felt my entire body stiffen. I turned back, the tray pressed against my abdomen, and looked up at him. Up close, he was intimidatingly handsome, but there was a hardness around his mouth that made me uneasy. "What's your name?" he asked, as if he were asking the price of a bottle. "Cassandra," I answered, forcing a polite smile. "Cassandra Vale." The surname slipped out before I could stop it. It was my mother's maiden name, the one she had kept after my father left. A name I had always worn like armor. For a second, something flickered in his eyes. Amusement? Interest? I wasn't sure. "Vale," he repeated, tasting the word slowly. "Interesting." He glanced at my name tag, then back at my face. "You work here full-time?" "Yes, sir," I replied. I hated how small the word "sir" felt on my tongue, but it was required. He nodded slowly, then handed me his empty glass. His fingers brushed mine, just for a second, and I felt a strange chill. "You have a steady gaze, Cassandra," he said. "Most people look away when I stare at them. You don't." "I'm just doing my job," I murmured, not sure if he meant it as a compliment or a warning. That night, when my shift ended, I went outside as usual, expecting to see Noah on the curb, maybe with his sketchbook or his crumpled book of poems. But he wasn't there. The sidewalk was empty except for a crushed soda can rolling in the wind. The absence hit me harder than it should have. I stood there longer than usual, my eyes scanning the street, hoping he would suddenly appear from the shadows, smiling that quiet smile that always grounded me. He didn't. For the first time in weeks, I went home without saying goodnight to him. The next day at the hospital, the doctor's words carved into me like a knife. "We've delayed as much as we can, Miss Vale. If your mother doesn't begin this treatment soon, her chances will decrease significantly." He spoke softly, but the numbers he mentioned were brutal. The cost of the treatment, the additional care she would need, the medications, it all added up to an amount that didn't belong in my world. It might as well have been a foreign language. My knees almost gave out. I signed papers I barely understood, eyes burning, pretending I still had control over my life. When I left the hospital, my phone buzzed with a message from a number I didn't recognize. "Miss Vale, this is Miriam, assistant to Mr. Adrian Vale. He would like to invite you to a private dinner to discuss a potential opportunity. Transportation will be arranged if you accept." My heart stopped. I reread the message over and over, as if the words would change if I blinked long enough. A private dinner, a potential opportunity. It sounded wrong and promising at the same time. I thought of my mother, of the way her fingers trembled when she tried to hold a cup. I thought of Noah, of his blanket over my shoulders, his voice telling me I was allowed to be tired but not allowed to forget who I was. And suddenly, I was standing in the middle of two lives that hadn't even fully begun yet. That night, when I went back to the hotel, Noah was there again. He was sitting against the wall, sketchbook in hand, a small smile appearing as soon as he saw me. "Hey, Cassie," he said, as if no time had passed. "Rough day again?" His eyes scanned my face, reading emotions I hadn't even named yet. I stood there, frozen, the message from Adrian still glowing on my phone screen, burning a hole in my pocket. 2 men, 2 worlds, and me, somewhere in the middle, about to make a choice I would spend the rest of my life paying for. I sat down beside Noah, the cold from the pavement seeping through my clothes. For a moment, I didn't speak. I just listened to our breathing, the distant echo of traffic, the quiet rustle of his pages. Then I asked the question that would change everything, although I didn't realize it yet. "Noah," I whispered, my voice trembling, "if you had the chance to save someone you love but it meant losing yourself, would you do it?" He didn't answer right away. He closed his sketchbook slowly, set it aside, and turned to face me fully. His eyes were darker than usual, reflecting the streetlight above us. "Depends," he said quietly. "Are you saving them? Or just postponing the moment you'll both break?" His words sank into me like stones thrown into deep water, creating ripples that would reach all the way to the future, where I stood in diamonds and regret, married to wealth and haunted by the memory of the man who had nothing but still managed to own my heart. That was the night I realized love and survival aren't always on the same side, and that sometimes the worst prison you can end up in is the life you chose to protect the people you love. I was 27 when I married wealth, but the moment I said I do, a part of me knew I was also burying the last trace of the woman Noah had seen in me. Standing beside Adrian Vale under a canopy of white orchids, I felt the silk of my gown like a chain, heavy and exquisite. The guests applauded, champagne flowed, cameras flashed, and yet my eyes kept drifting to the tall windows of the mansion, searching for the night sky as if it could offer a way out. My new husband's fingers tightened around mine possessively, as though sealing a deal rather than forming a bond. Behind the orchestra's melody, behind the polished vows spoken with perfect diction, I felt my heart sinking like an anchor into a sea of choices I could never undo. But this moment, this wedding shimmering in gold and deceit, didn't happen overnight. It was the result of a single dinner, an invitation that had felt like a lifeline when I was drowning in hospital bills and fear. When I stepped into Adrian's penthouse for the first time, my breath caught in my throat. The floor-to-ceiling windows overlooked the glittering city. The marble floors reflected the glow of soft lights, and the air smelled of expensive wine and something colder. Ambition, perhaps. He welcomed me with a smile that felt rehearsed, as if he had worn it for years and perfected every angle. The dining table was set for two, each plate rimmed with gold, each candle carefully placed to cast flattering shadows. "Thank you for coming, Cassandra," he said, gesturing for me to sit. His voice was smooth, practiced, leaving no room for hesitation. I obeyed because at that moment I didn't know how to refuse a man who lived in a world so far above mine that my very presence felt borrowed. Aromas of dishes I couldn't pronounce filled the air, and yet I barely tasted any of it. My stomach was twisted in knots, my mind racing with questions I was too afraid to ask. Finally, he set down his glass, leaned back in his chair, and studied me in silence. I felt like a specimen under glass. "You strike me as someone who knows responsibility intimately," he began, his eyes narrowing slightly. "Someone who carries burdens that aren't entirely her own." His words sliced through me, and I wondered how much he had learned about my mother, my job, my debts. Wealth gives people access to information the rest of us never imagine. "Your mother's health, for example," he added casually, sipping his wine. My heart stopped. "Her condition is treatable, but expensive." I felt exposed, stripped of every secret I had tried to keep private. "How do you know about that?" I whispered, my hands trembling under the table. He didn't apologize. He didn't even pretend it was inappropriate. "I make it my business to know the circumstances of people I choose to invest in." His tone was calm, almost warm, but there was steel underneath. "And I'm offering you an investment opportunity, Cassandra. One that would save your mother's life." My throat closed. For a moment the room blurred. What do you mean?" Adrian leaned forward, folding his hands atop the table. "I am a man who values loyalty and partnership. I do not trust easily. But I recognize potential when I see it. You have a steadiness, a dignity, a devotion that cannot be bought." His gaze felt like a spear tracing lines along my skin. I am in need of a wife, someone poised, loyal, and capable of carrying my name with grace. In return, I would ensure your mother receives the best treatment available. No bills, no delays, no uncertainty. My heart roared in my chest. The air disappeared from the room. This wasn't a proposal. It was a contract disguised as salvation. You don't even know me, I managed, my voice barely audible. I know enough, he answered simply. And the rest, we'll learn. He reached for his wine again, perfectly composed. Consider it a mutually beneficial arrangement. You get security, I get stability, and your mother gets a future. His words echoed inside me long after the dinner ended. As I rode the elevator down to the lobby, the city lights blurred with the tears I tried to hold back. Outside, the cold air slapped my cheeks awake. I looked around, half expecting to see Noah sitting on his usual spot, wrapped in his backpack and quiet strength. But he wasn't there. The night felt emptier without him, as though he had slipped into another world while I was busy stepping into one that didn't belong to me. When I finally found him again, 2 nights later, he was sitting on the curb sketching the neon reflection of a passing bus. Relief washed over me so intensely that my knees almost buckled. Noah, I breathed, and he looked up with a warm smile that made everything inside me tremble. You disappeared, he teased softly. Thought you'd finally decided I wasn't worth sitting on cold pavement for. I sat beside him, my heart thundering, the weight of Adrian's offer crushing my lungs. I had something come up, I said weakly. Something big. He studied my face carefully, his expression shifting from curiosity to concern. Cassie, what happened? I swallowed hard. I wanted to tell him everything. I wanted to spill every fear, every future that was being shoved in front of me like a door I didn't want to open. But the words froze, because I knew what he would say. He would tell me not to sell myself. He would remind me of who I was. He would tell me that saving my mother didn't have to cost my soul. And I didn't know if I could bear hearing the truth when the alternative was a cure she desperately needed. So instead, I whispered the safest thing I could manage. I'm scared, Noah. His thumb brushed my knuckles. Gentle, grounding. Tell me what you're afraid of. Everything in me cracked. Losing the person I love most, I whispered. Losing the only family I have left. He leaned closer, his forehead nearly touching mine, his voice a soft tremor. Then hold on to her. Fight for her. But don't lose yourself in the process, Cassie. People can survive sickness, but they can't survive becoming someone they no longer recognize. His words were a knife because they were true. And truth hurts the most when you're about to betray it. The following week, my mother collapsed. I held her hand as doctors rushed her down the corridor. Her breath was shallow, her eyes clouded. Cassandra, she whispered, struggling for air, promise me. You'll live your life, not survive it. Live it. Those were her words before the doors closed. And in that moment, my decision shattered into place. Survival wasn't enough. Living required a miracle only Adrian Vale could afford. When I said yes to him, it didn't feel like choosing. It felt like surrender. And when Noah found out, because of course he did, his eyes shattered in a way I will never forget. He didn't yell, he didn't accuse. He simply looked at me as though I had taken something precious from him and handed it to someone who would never understand its worth. Cassie, he whispered, voice breaking. You don't belong in his world. You belong in the one you created when you sat on the ground with me. Don't trade that for gold. But I already had. The morning after my wedding, I woke up beside a man whose presence felt more like a contract than a companion. Adrian slept peacefully, his breathing steady, his hand resting over mine with the weight of ownership rather than affection. The sunlight spilled across the silk sheets, warming everything except the cold place inside my chest where Noah's memory lived like an unanswered question. I stared at the ceiling, feeling the quiet ache of a life I had chosen for all the right reasons and all the wrong ones. The house was vast, silent, breathtaking, yet I felt small within it, like a guest who had overstayed her welcome. When I slipped out of bed and walked through the endless hallway, my footsteps echoed in a way that reminded me how lonely luxury could be. The staff greeted me with polite smiles and lowered heads, avoiding direct eye contact as if I were already expected to behave like someone above them. But I didn't feel above anyone. I felt buried beneath expectations I didn't know how to carry. As I sipped the coffee someone had prepared for me without asking how I liked it, I realized that even small choices were no longer mine. Everything was scripted, orchestrated, and presented as convenience. Yet convenience can become a cage when it replaces your freedom. Throughout the first days of marriage, Adrian treated me with a courteous distance. He was never cruel, never loud, never demanding in the ways people warned me powerful men could be. His version of control was quieter, more polished. He made decisions before I even realized decisions had existed. Dinners for charity, meetings with fashion consultants, a schedule curated for a woman I barely recognized. And every time I questioned something, he responded with the same calm certainty. Cassandra, this is simply how our world works. You'll adjust. His tone was never harsh, but it left no room for who I used to be. The only place where I still felt like myself was at my mother's bedside. Her treatment began within days, and the improvement was slow but real. Her eyes were clearer, her voice steadier, and every time she squeezed my hand, hope bloomed inside me like something I hadn't dared to feel in months. She always insisted that Adrian was a blessing, a miracle disguised in a suit. And I smiled for her sake, letting her believe the fairy tale she needed. But whenever she fell asleep, I stared at the machines keeping her stable and wondered what I had sacrificed to make them beep in rhythm. During those visits, I often found myself thinking of Noah, where he slept now, whether he still sketched under the streetlights, whether he still saved a spot beside him on the sidewalk without realizing it. The last time we had spoken, the hurt in his voice had been quiet but devastating. "Cassie," he had said, "you're trading love for survival. One day you'll wake up and realize survival isn't enough." I told myself he was wrong, that I was making the noble choice, the necessary choice. But late at night, in the silence of my new bedroom, those words slipped into my thoughts like ghosts I could not exorcise. A month after the wedding, the first unexpected crack in my new life appeared. I was leaving the hospital after visiting my mother, wrapping my coat tighter around myself as the evening wind brushed my cheeks. A familiar figure sat on a bench near the entrance, hunched over, sketchbook in hand. My breath caught midair. For a moment, I thought it was him. The same curve of the shoulders, the same stillness, the same worn backpack. My heart raced the way it used to when I crossed the hotel threshold after a long shift, praying he would be there. But when the man lifted his head, it wasn't Noah. Just a stranger with tired eyes and pencil-stained fingers. Relief washed over me, followed by disappointment so sharp it felt like betrayal. As if I had betrayed myself by hoping. I walked past him quickly, ashamed of the sting in my chest. That night, when I returned home, Adrian was waiting for me in the living room, flipping through financial reports. He glanced up at me with mild curiosity. "How is your mother today?" he asked, as though discussing a stock he'd invested in. "She's improving," I answered softly. "Slowly, but improving." He nodded once, satisfied. "Good. Your stability depends on hers." His words were matter of fact, not cruel, but they hit me like a blow. Stability. It was the first time he'd said it so plainly. That my value in this arrangement was directly tied to my mother's well-being. If she recovered fully, where would that leave me? A wife chosen for convenience. A figure to stabilize his image. Someone replaceable once the purpose was fulfilled. For the first time, I felt the ground beneath my new life shift. Weeks passed, and I tried to bury the unease. I followed the schedule Adrian's assistant curated, attended charity galas wearing dresses chosen by stylists I barely spoke to, acted the part of the perfect wife with practiced smiles and elegant posture. People adored me. Not because they knew me, but because they knew the man beside me. And Adrian basked in the admiration as if it were oxygen. One night, at an exclusive charity event, I spotted a familiar notebook on a small table near the entrance. A worn, faded cover, pencil marks along the edges. For a split second, the world stopped. I moved toward it slowly, my breath trembling, my fingertips brushing the scratches on the surface. The room blurred around me, voices turning into echoes. But when I opened the first page, the sketch inside wasn't Noah's. It was a printed design sample for the event, a coincidence mocking me with a memory. Still, my hands wouldn't stop shaking. I excused myself, stepping onto the balcony overlooking the city. The cold air hit my skin sharply, grounding me. I leaned against the railing, staring at the lights below. Somewhere out there, Noah was existing in a world I no longer belonged to. If I had ever belonged to it at all. Maybe he had moved on. Maybe he had forgotten me. Or maybe he still sat under the street lamp thinking of the girl who once shared a sandwich with him on a cold night. Everything all right? Adrian's voice broke through the night, smooth and controlled. I straightened, nodding. Just needed some air. He stepped beside me, his gaze scanning my face with calculating precision. You've seemed distant lately. I'm just adjusting, I whispered. Adjust faster, he said quietly, not unkindly, but with the weight of expectation pressing on every syllable. The world watches everything we do. His hand slid around my waist, firm, possessive. To outsiders, it might have looked protective, but all I felt was the steel of obligation tightening around me. And that was when the second crack appeared. A small shift inside me, a recognition that my life had become a performance, and I no longer knew which parts were real. Back home that night, while Adrian slept, I wandered through the halls of the mansion barefoot, craving silence that didn't feel artificial. My footsteps led me to a forgotten storage room at the end of the west wing. Inside, covered with white sheets and dust, were remnants of a life Adrian never spoke about. Boxes of old letters, framed photos turned backward, a broken guitar leaning against a wall. Curiosity tugged at me. Carefully, I lifted a sheet from a painting resting on the floor. My breath stopped. It was a portrait of a young boy, dark-haired, solemn, eyes filled with a haunting sadness. The signature at the bottom was faint, but unmistakable. Noah. Shock rippled through me so violently that I nearly dropped the frame. I stared at the signature again, then at the painting, then at the boxes surrounding me as panic clawed at my throat. Noah had painted this. Adrian had kept it, hidden it. Why? How had their lives crossed? Before I could gather my thoughts, footsteps echoed behind me. I turned sharply, clutching the frame to my chest. Adrian stood in the doorway, expression unreadable. The shadows cast across his face made him look older, colder, almost dangerous. You weren't supposed to find that, he said quietly. And just like that, the third crack split my world open. For a moment, neither of us moved. The portrait felt heavy in my hands, not because of its weight, but because of the truth pulsing beneath its surface, a truth I could feel even before Adrian spoke. His eyes didn't leave mine, and in that stillness, something in the room shifted. The polished world he'd built around us, the flawless facade he maintained, cracked just enough for me to see the man behind it. And what I saw terrified me more than the secrets themselves. Vulnerability, regret, and a darkness he had spent years burying under marble floors and expensive suits. Put it down, Cassandra, he said softly, but his tone held an authority that made my pulse stumble. My fingers loosened, and I carefully set the painting on a covered chest. Adrian stepped into the room, the door closing behind him with a quiet click that felt too final, too deliberate. Dust swirled in the thin beam of moonlight filtering through the single window, settling on memories he had hidden long before I ever entered his life. He walked past me, stopping beside the painting. For a long moment, he simply stared at it, his jaw tightening, his breathing uneven. It was the first time I had ever seen his composure falter. When he finally spoke, his voice was lower, rougher, as though pulled from a place he hadn't visited in years. He painted that when he was 13. My breath caught. 13. Noah's name trembled on my tongue, but I didn't dare speak it yet. Adrian continued. He was gifted, obsessed with capturing truth in whatever he touched. My father hated it. Said art was a waste of time, a distraction for people too weak to survive the real world. He paused, exhaling slowly. But I admired him. I admired the courage he had to create beauty, even when everything around him was falling apart. I stepped closer, heart pounding. You knew him. It wasn't a question. The truth was already unraveling between us. Adrian nodded once. Knew him? He was my brother. The air vanished from the room. I felt it leave my lungs, leave the world, leaving only a ringing silence and the thunder of my heartbeat. Brother. The man I had loved before I even understood the shape of love. The man who had sat on the pavement and shared warmth with me in a world that had grown cold. The man I had abandoned to marry the one standing in front of me. My voice cracked when I finally managed. Why didn't you tell me? Adrian's eyes flicked toward mine, and for the first time since the day we met, the man behind the mask revealed himself. Fractured, haunted, human. Because I didn't know until recently, he admitted. I didn't recognize him when you first said his name. Noah is common. Even the last name, I thought it was coincidence. He swallowed hard. But a week after the wedding, one of my security teams flagged a pattern. They'd seen you giving food to a homeless man near the hotel months before. They ran facial recognition. And when I saw the report, his voice faltered. He looked away. I hadn't seen him since he was 16, he confessed. He ran away. Our father. He was not a kind man. I tried to protect Noah, but I was only 18 at the time. I didn't know how. One night, after a fight, Noah left and never came back. His words were unraveling in slow, painful strands. I felt my chest tighten, my breath trembling as memories collided. Noah's quiet sadness, the distant look in his eyes whenever he mentioned a place he couldn't go back to yet. The clarity of his pain disguised beneath kindness. Adrian brushed dust off the painting, fingertips tracing the signature. I looked for him, he whispered. Years later, after I took control of the company, but he'd disappeared. No records, no ID, no bank account, not even a cell phone. It was like he'd erased himself from the world just to escape our father's shadow. Tears blurred my vision. I imagined a teenage Noah alone on the streets, surviving on scraps of dignity and art, carrying wounds that had never healed because no one had held them long enough to help. And I imagined myself sitting beside him years later, unaware that fate had woven us together long before we knew each other's names. Adrian's gaze hardened, shifting from sorrow to something sharper. When I learned it was him, when I realized you had sat beside my brother on the street. His jaw clenched. I didn't know what to think. My heart twisted. Were you angry? He hesitated, and that pause was answer enough. I was afraid, he admitted. Afraid you'd choose him. The words pierced through me like a blade of truth sharpened over years of control. Not anger, not jealousy. Fear. Fear that the woman he married for stability would find something in the man he had lost. Something no amount of wealth could replicate. I wiped my cheeks, my hands trembling. I never knew. I swear I never knew he was your brother. Adrian nodded, the tension in his shoulders loosening just enough to show he believed me. I know. That's why I didn't confront you earlier. I needed time to understand what I was feeling, and what I was willing to admit. He dragged a hand through his hair, suddenly looking exhausted. I don't hate him, Cassandra. I never did. But I hate the life he chose. Or maybe the life he believed he deserved. His voice cracked in the slightest, and my chest tightened at the sound. For all his power, for all his control, Adrian was still a man carrying the guilt of losing someone he should have protected. What happened to him? I whispered. Why didn't he come home? Adrian's silence was long, waited. Then he whispered, because home never felt safe. The truth descended like rain, gentle at first, then overwhelming. Noah hadn't just been homeless. He had been running from a past stitched with bruises and broken promises, a past that shared blood with the man I had married. I sank onto a covered chest, the room spinning slowly around me. Adrian, does he know? Does he know you're looking for him? Does he know you're... He knows I exist, Adrian interrupted softly. But I doubt he would ever come to me willingly. He paused. In his eyes, I represent everything that destroyed our childhood. I shook my head, unshed tears burning hot. That's not true. But even as I said it, I didn't fully believe it. Noah had never spoken of his family. Not once. That silence now felt deafening. Adrian stepped closer, lowering himself to my level, his voice barely above a whisper. Cassandra, I didn't marry you because of him. I married you because I saw strength in you. Strength that reminded me of... He stopped before finishing the sentence. But now that the truth is out, things will become more complicated. A chill shot through me. Complicated how? He held my gaze steadily. Because you still care about him. It wasn't an accusation. It was a revelation. One that tasted like guilt and longing all at once. I don't know what I feel anymore. I whispered truthfully. My life changed so fast I barely recognized my own heartbeat. Adrian nodded slowly, as if he understood more than he wanted to. Then we'll have to decide what happens next. Before I could ask what he meant, footsteps echoed down the hallway. His assistant's voice called, "Mr. Vale, there's something you need to see. It's urgent." Adrian stood instantly, his mask of composure sliding back into place. "We'll continue this later," he said. But something in his tone suggested the conversation had only just begun. As he left the room, I remained seated, staring at the portrait of a boy whose eyes held the same quiet sadness I had seen years later under a flickering streetlight. Noah wasn't just a memory. He was a wound, one that connected us all, whether we wanted it to or not. And I felt with a tremor of dread that the past we had all tried to escape was about to catch up with us. The next morning, the mansion felt different, heavier, as if the walls themselves had overheard everything Adrian and I had uncovered the night before. I walked through the endless corridors with a weight pressing against my chest, each step echoing in that polished space like a reminder of the life I had stepped into without understanding its shadows. Adrian had left early, summoned to an urgent meeting, though his tight expression hinted that the urgency was personal rather than professional. I watched from the balcony as his car disappeared down the long driveway, the taillights fading like a warning slipping into the horizon. I couldn't stop thinking about the painting, about Noah as a boy, fragile and gifted, trapped in a world ruled by a father who crushed softness like an inconvenience. The image had carved itself into my mind, merging with the memory of the man I met on the sidewalk, the man who had survived pain by turning it into gentleness, the same man whose eyes had shattered when I told him I was choosing a different life. I kept hearing his voice, the tremor of hurt inside it. "You don't belong in his world, Cassie." But now I knew something he never told me, that the world he fled was the same world I had married into. The realization made my skin prickle with dread. I needed answers, not just about who Adrian had once been, but about who he was now. And deeper still, I needed to know what Noah had run from, and why he had never looked back. Driven by a desperation that didn't feel like my own, I returned to the storage room. The moment I opened the door, the smell of dust and old memories wrapped around me. I knelt beside the boxes, pulling them open one by one. Letters, photographs, broken frames, childhood drawings, pieces of a past that had been intentionally buried. I found a stack of notebooks filled with angry handwriting, Adrian's journal from his teenage years. I hesitated before opening the first one, feeling a strange guilt for invading his privacy. But the moment I read the first page, my breath froze. It wasn't anger. It was fear. Line after line described nights when their father screamed until the walls shook, nights when Noah locked himself in a closet to stay quiet, days when Adrian tried to shield him, but couldn't. The entries grew more frantic as the pages turned, detailing their father's descent into harsher punishments, colder tempers, crueler silence. The final entry ended abruptly. Noah is gone. I don't know where. I don't know if he's safe. I don't know if I'll ever forgive myself. I closed the journal slowly, my hands trembling. Adrian had carried guilt for years, guilt heavy enough to twist him into the man he became. And Noah had carried wounds deep enough to run barefoot through the night and never return. A soft knock startled me. I turned quickly as Miriam, Adrian's assistant, stepped inside. Her face was pale, her usually calm demeanor cracked around the edges. "Mrs. Vale," she said quietly, "I need you to come with me." Something in her tone made my pulse quicken. "What happened?" She hesitated, a moment too long. "It's about your husband." Fear crawled up my spine. I followed her through the narrow hallway, down the stairs, and into Adrian's office. She closed the door behind us, her hands clasped tightly in front of her. "There was an incident this morning," she said carefully, "at the outreach shelter downtown." My breath caught. Shelter? Why was Adrian there? Her eyes flicked to the floor. Because Noah was. For a moment, the room tilted. "What do you mean Noah was there?" My voice cracked, betraying the storm inside me. Miriam swallowed. "Adrian went looking for him. He didn't tell anyone at first, but after last night, I think he wanted answers of his own." She paused, gathering her composure. "He found him. Or at least he found where Noah had been staying." My heartbeat pounded in my ears. "Where is he now?" "We don't know." The floor fell out beneath me. Miriam continued. "According to witnesses, Noah left the shelter early this morning. He seemed agitated, unwell. My chest tightened with fear. He had already been fragile, but something must have shaken him deeply. What triggered it?" Miriam hesitated again, and the answer that followed chilled me. "He saw the news article." "Article?" I repeated. She handed me her tablet. On the screen was a headline accompanied by a photo of me and Adrian from our wedding day. "Billionaire heir Adrian Vale marries hotel employee after months of secret courtship." Noah must have found out. He must have read about the marriage I entered without explaining, without warning him, without saying goodbye. My throat tightened painfully. "There's more," Miriam said softly. "One of the volunteers at the shelter said Noah mentioned your name before he left. He was shaking. She said he looked lost. Lost." The words sliced through me. "Where did he go?" I whispered. "We're trying to find him," she said. "But the trail is Adrian
faint.
is already searching." My panic turned sharp. "He's out there alone? Like this?" After seeing that, Miriam stepped closer, her voice gentler. "Mrs. Vale, I need to ask you something. And I need the truth, not the polished version you give the press." I swallowed. "Ask me. Do you care about Noah?" The answer rose from my chest before thought could stop it. Yes. It escaped like a confession I had been holding underwater. I care about him more than I should. More than I ever admitted. Miriam closed her eyes as if confirming something she already suspected. "Then you need to prepare yourself. When Adrian finds him, whatever happens next won't be simple." A cold tremor rippled through me. "Why?" I whispered. She looked at me with a sadness that made my stomach twist. "Because love and guilt don't mix well, Mrs. Vale. And both of your men are drowning in them." My breath faltered. "What aren't you telling me?" Miriam lowered her voice. "A man can forgive a brother for running away." She paused, her words trembling. "But he cannot easily forgive him for taking his wife's heart with him." The truth fell into the room like a stone dropping into deep water. Silent at first, then devastating. And in that moment, I felt the future tightening around all three of us. a storm brewing from years of secrets, mistakes, and love left to starve in the cold. Somewhere out there, Noah was disappearing again, and Adrian was determined to bring him back, whether for reconciliation or for closure. The car ride into the city felt longer than any journey I had taken in my life. The world outside the window blurred past, streetlights stretching into streaks of gold, buildings flickering like ghosts, pedestrians moving in hurried shadows. Yet none of it reached me. My heart was somewhere else entirely, searching for Noah in every alley, every sidewalk, every place where people disappeared when life became too heavy to carry. Miriam sat beside me in silence, stealing worried glances as I wrung my hands until my fingers ached. Rain began to fall, soft at first, then harder, drumming against the roof of the car like a warning. The city swallowed us whole, and when we finally stopped in front of the shelter where Noah had last been seen, the night felt colder, as if it, too, knew we were nearing the edge of something irreversible. I stepped out, the rain soaking my hair, my clothes, my bones, but I barely felt it. All I could hear was the echo of Noah's voice from months ago. "Don't lose yourself in the process, Cassie." Inside the shelter, volunteers moved in quiet coordination. Faces were tired, concerned, anxious. When they recognized me, some froze, unsure why someone dressed in wealth was standing in a place built for survival. I found the woman Miriam had mentioned, a middle-aged volunteer with kind eyes and worry etched across her forehead. "You're Cassandra," she said immediately, her voice trembling with recognition. He said your name." My breath hitched. "Please, tell me what happened." She nodded, leading me toward a small room where blankets were piled in uneven stacks. "Noah got here late last night," she explained. "He looked exhausted, more than usual. He asked if he could sleep in the corner near the window. I told him yes, he's always polite, never causes trouble." Her voice cracked. "But this morning, he woke up early. He looked devastated. He had that picture pulled up on his phone. Your wedding." My heart twisted painfully. "Did he say anything?" She hesitated. He whispered something like, "I knew she'd choose safety. I just didn't think safety would feel like losing her twice." Tears blurred my vision instantly. The volunteer reached out, squeezing my hand gently. "He didn't blame you. He blamed himself. He kept saying he should never have let you sit with him that first night." A quiet sob escaped me before I could stop it. "Do you know where he went?" I whispered. She shook her head sadly. "Only that he left in a hurry, and that he forgot this." She handed me something small and soft, a folded piece of paper worn at the edges. I opened it slowly, my fingers trembling. Inside was a sketch. Me, sitting on the curb in my hotel uniform, sharing a sandwich with him under the burnt orange glow of a streetlight. He had drawn me smiling, not the polite smile I used with guests. A real one. The kind I hadn't worn since the day I married Adrian Vale. Tears spilled freely. "He said he didn't need it anymore," the woman whispered. "Said he couldn't trust what his heart remembered." I pressed the drawing to my chest, a quiet ache expanding inside me. Before I could speak, Miriam entered the room out of breath. "Mrs. Vale, Adrian found something." My pulse surged. "Where is he?" "Downtown, under the old overpass." Cold fear shot through me. That was one of the harshest parts of the city, where people slept only if they were desperate or broken. I ran out into the rain, ignoring the way Miriam called after me. The driver barely had time to open the car door before I climbed inside, heart pounding wildly. The overpass was dimly lit, the concrete slick with rainwater. The sound of cars above rumbled like distant thunder. When I stepped out of the car, I saw Adrian standing a few yards away, his suit soaked, his hair matted to his forehead. His expression was a storm of anguish and determination. "Adrian!" I called. "Where is he?" He didn't turn immediately. When he did, his eyes were shadowed with something fractured. "He was here," he said quietly. "A few minutes ago." My stomach dropped. "Did you see him?" He nodded. Yes. The word carried weight. Heavy, painful, unresolved. What happened? I whispered. Adrian looked away toward the shadows beneath the overpass. He didn't want to talk to me, couldn't even look me in the eyes. He thought I came to punish him. His voice tightened. I told him I didn't want to fight. I told him I just wanted answers. What did he say? Adrian hesitated. Only that losing our father was easier than losing you. The words hit me like a blow. I staggered, gripping the damp railing for support. I tried to stop him, Adrian continued, his voice cracking, but he ran. Where? The river. I didn't wait for anything else. I ran, faster than I ever had, my breath burning, my lungs screaming. The path sloped downward toward the riverbank, where the rain blurred the world into smeared streaks of gray. My shoes slipped on the wet ground, my hair plastered to my face, but I didn't stop. I couldn't. Noah! I screamed, the name tearing from my throat like a plea, a confession, a prayer. At first, there was no answer. Only rain. Only the roar of water. Only the suffocating fear that I would be too late. Then, a silhouette near the edge of the river, sitting with knees drawn to his chest, head bowed. My heart broke open. I slowed, breath trembling, steps soft against the wet earth. Noah. He didn't turn, didn't flinch, didn't breathe, it seemed. I approached slowly, feeling the weight of every step, every choice, pressing into the ground beneath me. When I was close enough, he finally spoke. His voice was hollow, empty, a ghost of the man I once knew. You shouldn't be here, Cassandra. I sank to the ground beside him, rain soaking us both. I had to find you. You already did, he whispered. And then you lost me. A sob caught in my chest. I never stopped caring. That's the problem. He turned his face slightly, just enough for me to see the pain carved into it. You cared enough to save everyone but yourself. He shook his head. I wasn't angry when you married him. I was relieved. Relieved? He nodded. Because I never believed I deserved to be chosen. My heart shattered. You did. You always did. No, he murmured. I'm the reason Adrian lost his childhood. I'm the reason our father broke him. And I'm the reason you're trapped in a life you didn't want. I grabbed his hand, cold, trembling, familiar. You are not the reason for any of that. He finally looked at me, and his eyes held everything he had never said. Love, loss, regret, and a depth of sadness that felt endless. I wanted to stay, he whispered, but I can't fight a world built on money when all I have is hope. And hope doesn't feed people. Hope doesn't heal mothers. Hope doesn't buy inhalers or treatments or beds in hospitals. Hope only hurts when you try to hold on to it. I leaned closer, tears mixing with rain. Then let me hold on for both of us. No. He stood slowly, pulling his hand from mine. You belong somewhere warm, Cassandra. Somewhere safe. I belong where my heart is, I whispered. He closed his eyes as if the words wounded him. Then you'll break it. Let it break, I begged. Just don't disappear. He stepped back, his silhouette dissolving into the rain. If I stay, I ruin everything. Adrian deserves peace. You deserve a life without guilt. And he swallowed hard. I deserve the quiet. Noah, please. He shook his head gently. I'll be fine, Cassie. I've survived worse than heartbreak. He began walking away, each step a cut through the night. You saved your mother. Now save yourself. The rain swallowed his figure until he was gone, not running, not hiding, just leaving. A trembling sob escaped me, and I sank to my knees on the cold, wet ground. Behind me, footsteps approached. Adrian knelt beside me, resting a hesitant hand on my shoulder. He's alive, he murmured, and he knows you care. I nodded, tears falling freely, but he's gone. Adrian's voice softened in a way I had never heard before. Some people love by leaving Cassandra. For him, that was the only way he believed he could protect you. I looked toward the river, where the rain continued to blur the horizon. Will he ever come back? Adrian was silent for a long moment. Then he whispered, when he believes he deserves to. And somewhere in that quiet, painful truth, a small seed of hope rooted itself. Fragile, trembling, but alive. Because love, even broken, has a way of finding its way home.